as social beings, I think that we all thrive when we feel more connected to each other. And so it's just trying to figure out, how do we show like the benefits of having like a diverse, inclusive city or county.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come to win, we come to fly. This is where we make our dreams come to life. Welcome to Innovation City.
Welcome to Innovation City, a podcast featuring the innovators, disruptors, and creators who are making things happen. My name is Michael T. Johnson. I'm here with my co-host, Tyler Kelly. We are in Miami tonight, and we are at Venture Cafe Miami. So if you don't know about Venture Cafe, it is the largest gathering of innovators, entrepreneurs anywhere in the world. So if you're anywhere near a Venture Cafe on a Thursday night, I recommend that you go. So I'm very excited tonight because we have Meena Jagannath with us, and she is the co-director at the Community Justice Project. So thank you for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. So Meena is an activist, and has been an activist and an advocate for human rights for almost 20 years. And you say you've gone from India to Guatemala to Haiti, and somewhere along the way you picked up a passion for law. And you went to the University of Washington Law School where you received your JD. And as a movement lawyer with an extensive background, obviously, in international human rights and activism, you founded Community Justice Project.
Co-founded
with
Alana Greer.
So tell me about Community Justice Project.
Yeah, so we founded Community Justice Project in 2015. It came out of a collaboration or work that Alana Greer, Charles Alcesser, and I had been doing already together here in Miami. I, as you were mentioning, had worked in the international human rights context for a long time. Just before coming to Miami, I was working in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, and I was working at an organization that combined grassroots organizing and policy advocacy with direct legal representation. And so I really wanted to come back to the U.S. and practice in that way because I believe that, legal victories alone are not going to get us to where we need to be in terms of social change. Like, we really need to be working with people who are directly impacted by the issue, listening to them and figuring out, how we can best support the kinds of changes that they're seeking to make the world a more equitable place. And so when I came to Miami, I came here in 2012 and started working with Chuck, who had been a longtime lawyer. He now has like 45 years of experience in law, and he's like always been practicing law with like a community lawyering angle. And we, then Alana joined us, and there was a point at which, and I think actually it was just like in the sort of Ferguson time, that we were finding that the way that we practiced law and the kind of law that we did and just the way we operated was different from like legal services organization. And so Community Justice Project actually grew out of Florida Legal Services, but we decided that because we wanted to have a more versatile, just more creative kind of organization, that we wanted to sort of create our own brand and create our own sort of identity. And so in 2015, we kind of put the sort of starting points together at the end of 2014, and then finally in 15 decided to launch it. We were lucky to receive 2 like seed grants that gave us like a 2-year runway. One was Echoing Green, and the other was a grant from Harvard Law School. And so we, in those 2 years, we had the ability to really kind of design our own practice. And though, we had basically taken all the folks that we had worked with before and we continued to work with them, we were then able to sort of add like a whole bunch of new programming. So the idea really was to figure out, how, in the ecosystem of, social entrepreneurs and startups and, activist organizations and organizers and community groups, like how could we help to kind of be a bridge for all of that and really ensure that people whose voices don't tend to get heard and who tend to be sort of left out of the table, how we could help be a bridge to like all of the new energy and resources that were coming to Miami.
So you talk a little bit about like this gap that community organizations, like there's a gap that you're filling. You talked about being, the public legal services, and then like there's the ACLU. Like, where do you guys fit in that picture and help like in that regard, like especially for like community activism and things of that nature?
Yeah, so I think the legal community here, especially the public interest legal community, is pretty collaborative in a lot of ways, and so we each have our like the little niche that we fill. ACLU they do a lot of like impact litigation, so they're looking at they primarily use litigation as their tool, whereas we tailor really the type of legal tool to the specific needs and objectives. So in some cases that might be a policy fix, in another case it might be like research and putting out a report. In another case it might be litigation. In others, in the case of Ferguson, for example, like I'm a human rights lawyer, so we went to the UN with the activists and with the family of Michael Brown, and we've used human rights advocacy in other situations. So it really just depends. And I think part of what we try to do is to also, demystify the law, because so often I think people's ability to actually, be a part of the changes that are happening in their community and to actually be able to provide input comes from their ability to actually, identify, what is coming down, like, the pike, and also to be able to translate policy into sort of everyday words. And like once people understand like what the content is, then they can actually meaningfully provide some feedback as to whether, how they want to support that or not or whatever. So much of it is really making the law and making what's happening in the community accessible to a broader set of people, so that they have the ability to actually provide to be a part of that decision making process.
Yeah. So what are kind of like the biggest challenges or the biggest problems from a big picture that you guys are attacking and solving that seem to be common to a lot of human rights issues?
Yeah, I think what we see a lot is that many of the groups that we're working with, taxi drivers, farm workers, could be low-income tenants, public housing tenants, undocumented immigrants. Much of the time they are very removed or isolated from like a lot of what's happening, and sometimes it's because of their own like vulnerabilities. If you're undocumented, you might not necessarily want to be out, in the open. In other cases, for taxi drivers, for example, you're working so much that it's like the ability for you to, spend that additional time to get out there and be, in the communities and understand what's happening is a lot more difficult. And so I think like one of the biggest challenges is that there is, we mentioned it before, a huge gap between, the everyday lives of these folks and what they're living and the really like difficult conditions in which they're living, and like all of the stuff that's happening in the city. It's like all the development and the, startup money coming in and entrepreneurship and, like all the excitement of the city feels like, it's removed from these communities. And so it's like, how can, in a lot of ways, like a taxi driver, for example, is an entrepreneur. So how do we start to expand our notion of what an entrepreneur is to actually be able to, incorporate folks that, would most certainly benefit from additional training and additional like support in building their own businesses, and so it's this problem of like, we're trying to help like sort of create, more connections, like connect people who care and like about these communities, or, want to care about these communities, and actually like put a face to like what often is just a label oftentimes. Like, when people say domestic worker, it's like, okay, you might not know someone, or you might not know the stories of domestic workers. So it's in a way like having people interact with the actual people behind those stories, and understand, what our role is as we build the city in building a place that actually includes those folks, and doesn't just like depend on their labor, for example.
So I've seen in some of the stuff that you've written or talked about that, I mean, there's another issue, not just with the things that you talk about there, but like with a mentality that some people have that kind of prevents some of those resources from being shared. Can you talk about that as well?
A mentality of, you mean of just the general?
Yeah, you had mentioned, go ahead.
Oh, I was just well, I think what you're getting at is like this
idea of
scarcity mentality that the people
Sure.
have that have the resources.
Yeah.
That they're not willing for some
Right.
reason based on fear to share the love, right?
Sure. I mean, I think that I don't think that's a Miami thing. I think more generally there is this feeling like if we, that it's a zero-sum game, and that if we give up something, then someone's going to be getting something that they don't deserve, kind of thing, rather than really thinking about, what are the sort of historic inequities that brought us to this point, and what is required of us to really get to a point where people can fully participate. So like, rather than saying, well, it's all like, individual responsibility, and each, like, if only they applied themselves more, like they'd be in a better position, rather than thinking about it from that standpoint. It's like, well, how do we sort of create the conditions in which people can actually self-actualize, like in the ways that they want to. And I think right now, unfortunately, I mean, I don't know whether we're trending really in the right direction, because I think that people are becoming more and more sort of, from what I see, like just like, well, I just got to look out for me and my own, and that kind of thing. And I think that we're, as social beings, I think that we all thrive when we feel more connected to each other, and the city as a whole is better when we're more connected to each other and we understand each other, and the people that we're like interacting with on a daily basis. And so it's just trying to figure out, how do we sort of counteract that, and really show like the benefits of having like a diverse, inclusive, a much more like prosperous city or county, because right now I think like the wages are super low in Miami, and what we're finding is that the amount of money that people are earning is not enough for them to afford a place in Miami. So folks are getting pushed more and more into the margins, or doubling up on housing, and it just, it creates like a lot of issues, because then, the workers that are, your barista in the cafe, or, whoever they may be, your teacher, they're having, so it's that much harder for them to even just get to work, to like, do what they need to be doing, and then, and earn their living. So I think part of it is like, how do we reduce the barriers for people to just live, and be able to have like a decent living after they've worked a full day,
I love the, just this, I've never heard it explained this way, because it's always like, everyone needs to like do their fair share, or, like earn their keep or whatever is typically the conversation that people have. But the idea that whole mindset is based on like a scarcity mentality, I've never heard that before, but it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, we're such a rich country. We have the ability, and like we're super innovative. Like there's so many things that we can do. Like if we actually like put our best minds towards like the problems that we have, and don't think about like, oh well, if we did this, then someone who didn't have something before like would now have something. It's like, okay, like that, it's like that is the thing that's standing in our way, like versus like really being our full selves. And like if we apply the full force of our minds and technology and everything, then I think that we could arrive at actually a much better society.
Yeah, I love it because the starting point is not, lack and limitation. It's Miami, the United States, the world is fully abundant. You just can't block that abundance from the world, because when you block it, obviously, it doesn't go anywhere, right? So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, along those lines, you're talking about kind of innovative things happening. One of the things that we talk about in St. Louis a lot, because St. Louis has a lot of social and systematic issues that are probably amplified because of their unique situation. But we also see that because areas that have a lot of problems also have a lot of innovative social entrepreneurs and organizations that are on the forefront of solutions. So along those lines, are you seeing things that are promising or you're excited about, or what's coming up that you think you feel like is solutions to these issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're working on it. I think that Venture Cafe is great because it's one of those things that is new to Miami, and it's really opened up a space where where folks were not connecting. People are now regularly coming here and finding a community to be a part of, and I think that those kinds of interventions are the starting point for future collaborations, and so what I see is that there are people who grew up here who are coming back to Miami because they feel that there's something new happening. I think that's really exciting. I think, as we see with Parkland and other folks, there's a lot of energy among young people. And I think that's something that if Miami can really find a way to harness that and really nurture the level of passion and energy that clearly comes out of South Florida, I think that could be that is really promising. We're trying to do some of our work, even though ultimately we're a legal organization, I think what we found is that, by working with all these different groups, we had a unique sort of perspective on what was happening in different sectors, and what different parts of Miami were talking about. And so we've been creating spaces. One of the things that we do is called Salon Jus. They're a salon kind of inspired by the salons of Paris, and also in the Harlem Renaissance. There used to be a lot of salons at that time to get creative people from a lot of different creative people, thinkers, just sort of socialites, together to kind of produce new ideas. And I was really inspired by thinking about that era because it produced a lot of good ideas and a lot of new thinking. And so thinking about how can we recreate that at those spaces where people come from a lot of different backgrounds, different sectors, and different perspectives. How can we actually get folks to engage with each other more so that perhaps new ideas about how we move forward can come out of that. And so what we've been doing over the last year and a half is these periodic salons where it's anchored by someone who might be directly impacted by, let's say, the taxi industry, or directly impacted by sea level rise, or whatever it is, and have that a shorter conversation, 20-30 minute conversation anchor the evening. But then afterwards, people then turn to each other at tables and discuss how they relate to the issue. And the folks who are on the panel will come back to the tables. And it's been a pretty organic space where we've not tried to direct too much how that conversation goes, because the goal really is to get people thinking about some of these issues, and get folks connected to people who are directly impacted by them, but then also to think about how they relate to that, and where do they come into the picture, when it comes to migration or sea level rise or whatever. So that's, I think, something that's interesting and exciting, because we, whereas it started as an experiment, we see that there is a big appetite for that. And even just I think Community Justice Project, I don't know that, I mean, I think when we started it because we felt it needed to be started. That there was a hole to fill. But I think we've been really heartened by the level of support that we've gotten from everybody, all kinds of people in Miami, and that I think is also exciting, because I think it means that people fundamentally believe that equity, inclusion, like those are important things. And so it's good to like have that reflected back, because even though we started it like, sort of believing that those are important things, and that, like we should all be working towards that, like it's nice to have that also reflected back and cultivated.
I just had this thought just in this whole equity inclusion space for the listeners, right? It starts with you. Like it's the systematic issues, like it's on an individual level, because that scarcity mentality is like an individual thought pattern, right? So
Right.
I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. You change the thought pattern, then you can start to change things around you, the way you see things.
Yeah, I love it.
Or sometimes just connecting with someone, like you said, that's kind of that's experiencing the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I think for me, like, there's a way in which like we can look at an interaction and be like, oh, why did that person act that way? And we can either judge them, or we can think, okay, like what is like the sum of that person's life experiences that brought them to that, and be more compassionate about that, and then figure out, okay, like if people are dealing with trauma, if people are dealing with discrimination, people are dealing with, various types of things in their lives that, that maybe prevent them from being, their full perfect selves. Like how, what is our responsibility? What can we do as like folks around to help folks get to a better place,
So what's coming up on the horizon for Community Justice Project that you're seeing that's promising, or you're excited about, or?
Wow. Well, what's interesting is that we always think about things in terms of sort of defensive stuff, and then I think the more exciting space to be in is the affirmative stuff. So we have some pretty major fights, like defensive work in the areas of like immigrants' rights with ICE detainers, which is a wonky thing that I'm not going to get into right now, but you can look it up. There's housing and gentrification, things that we're involved in. But I think the flip side of the housing piece is that there's a lot of innovative and creative energy that's going into trying to think about policies that can really get ahead of the crisis, and of like some of the development pressures that seem to be creating more of a crisis. So it's like, how can we increase the pot of, funds available for constructing affordable housing? How can we, make sure that people who are in housing right now stay in it, and then there's like a whole other set of folks that are thinking about, community land trusts, and how do we think of like, putting together commercial space with residential space, but in like a sort of community controlled type of a mechanism. So, where like, once you have land, then you have the ability to be creative within that space of land. So it's like, how do you make, urban gardens? Like just trying to think about like the all the universe of options that are open once you have like access to a piece of land. So like what's exciting is that there is some like, sort of energy and creative thinking that's going into actually building what we want to see versus, just trying to like oppose stuff, so yeah.
That's awesome. So Meena, tell me, how can people get in touch with Community Justice Project online and social media, all that good stuff?
Yeah, so we have a website. It is we're going to be revamping it pretty soon, but the address will be the same. It's communityjusticeproject.com. On Twitter, we're at CJP Miami. Also on Instagram at CJP Miami. I'm at Meena Jag, MEENAJAG, and then you could just look us up on Facebook, Community Justice Project in Miami.
Awesome. Meena, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great conversation.
For more episodes, visit innovationcity.co and be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. If you're in Miami, visit us at Venture Cafe on Thursday nights. You can find details at venturecafemiami.org and connect with us on social at WeAreSlam and Venture Cafe MIA.
This is where it all begins, so say goodbye to all your fears, all your doubts. This is where they die. This is where we come.